In 1982, two black teens disappeared from a youth summer camp during a midnight scavenger hunt. 35 years later, a vault door is discovered inside a cave behind the camp's main building. The discovery wasn't loud, not at first. It was made by a pair of county surveyors, their boots crunching on fallen leaves and forgotten paths of what was once Camp Holloway. The camp had been closed for almost 2 decades, a place of overgrown weeds and decaying cabins, its cheerful signpost now just a rotted piece of wood pointing crookedly towards the silent woods. What were they even looking for, those surveyors? Boundary lines, forgotten easements. They weren't looking for a story, certainly not one that had been buried for so long. The cave itself was known, marked on old camp maps as Bear Cave. Though no bear had likely lived there for a century, it was considered a shallow, uninteresting formation, mostly ignored. But a recent landslip, perhaps triggered by heavy spring rains, had cleared away a curtain of earth and roots from the cave's deeper recesses, revealing something that didn't belong. A wall of metal. Dark, rusted, but unmistakably steel. It was set deep into the rock. A man-made scar in the ancient stone. A vault door. Who puts a vault door in a cave behind a children's summer camp? That was the first question, hanging heavy in the damp air. The surveyors reported it, of course. A curiosity. An anomaly. It took days for the news to trickle from county offices to the local sheriff's department, filed under unusual finding. For a while, that's all it was. Just a strange thing. But then, someone remembered. Someone always remembers, don't they? An older clerk in the records office, her memory jogged by the name Camp Holloway. She recalled the whispers, the old, unresolved tragedy. The 2 kids, Marcus and Lena, gone without a trace. The official story, pushed hard by the camp director at the time, a Mr. Henderson, was that they'd run away. 2 troubled teens, he'd called them, eager for the city's bright lights, tired of camp rules. Their families never believed it, not for a second. Marcus, always so responsible. Lena, scared of the dark. Run away? In the middle of a scavenger hunt, with a storm brewing? It made no sense. But what could they do? There were no leads, no evidence, just the word of a respected camp director against the desperate pleas of 2 grieving families. The woods were searched, of course, perfunctorily. The river was dragged. Nothing. Eventually, the case went cold, filed away like so many others, a dull ache in the heart of a small community. 35 years. A lifetime. Parents had grown old. Some had passed away, carrying that ache to their graves. Siblings had grown up with a shadow over their childhoods. The vault. When the connection was finally made, a shiver went through the small sheriff's department. Could it be? After all this time? A deputy was sent out. Then a detective. They stood before the thing, a hulking metal plate, its edges almost fused with the rock by time and rust. It looked like it had been there forever. There was no handle, no obvious lock, just a flat, forbidding surface. And then, one of the deputies, running his flashlight beam slowly across the pitted steel, saw them. Scratches. Deliberate. Not animal claws, not random damage. Letters. He knelt, wiping away grime. Faint, but legible. 2 names, Marcus. And below it, Lena. A collective intake of breath. It was them, their names, etched into the cold, unyielding metal. And then more words, a frantic, desperate scrawl beneath their names. We didn't run. The silence in the cave was absolute, broken only by the dripping of water somewhere in the darkness beyond the door. What did it mean? That they were here? Inside? The thought was too horrifying to voice immediately. 35 years. Trapped. The implications began to press down, suffocating. News, once a trickle, now became a torrent. The local paper picked it up, then regional news. Camp Holloway, once a forgotten name, was suddenly on everyone's lips. For Sarah, Marcus's younger sister, the phone call came on a Tuesday morning. She was 42, a teacher with a family of her own. But the news, the mention of Marcus's name, stripped away the years in an instant. She was 7 again, small and bewildered, her big brother gone, her parents' faces etched with a grief she couldn't comprehend but felt in her bones. That grief had become a part of her, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her life. She'd learned to live with the not knowing, the endless, agonizing questions, but she'd never forgotten. How could she? Now, this, a vault, his name, a message, hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her. Or was it something else? A prelude to a truth more terrible than any she had imagined. She had to go. There was no question. She booked a flight that afternoon, a small, worn photograph of Marcus tucked into her purse. A boy of 15, grinning, arms slung around a shyly smiling Lena, both in their bright yellow Camp Holloway t-shirts. The photograph felt heavy, like a stone. What secrets did that camp still hold? And what waited behind that impossible door? The flight felt endless, each mile closing the distance to a past she thought was buried, but was now, somehow, being exhumed. The old camp was even worse than Sarah had imagined. She arrived on a gray, drizzly morning, the kind that leaches color from the world. The main gate sagged, chained, and padlocked, a faded, no trespassing sign barely clinging to the rust. Detective Miller, a young, serious man from the county sheriff's office, met her there. He had a kind face, but his eyes held a weariness that spoke of difficult truths. He'd been assigned the case, this sudden resurrection of a ghost. He led her past the derelict cabins, their windows like vacant eyes, the mess hall, roof caved in on one side, the flagpole, askew, its rope rotted away. Everywhere, the scent of decay, of damp wood and forgotten summers. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. Marcus had walked these paths. Lena had laughed here. It was hard to reconcile the vibrant memories her parents had shared, the youthful energy of that old photograph, with this ruin. The cave was at the far end of the property, partially hidden by a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons. Yellow police tape cordoned off the area. It wasn't a large cave opening, more like a dark mouth in the hillside. And inside, illuminated by portable work lights, was the door. It was more imposing in person, larger, uglier, a solid slab of what looked like battleship steel, rough around the edges where it met the uneven rock. Rust bloomed in orange and brown patches, but the metal itself felt immensely strong, cold to the touch. Sarah stared at the scratches. Marcuslena. We didn't run. Her brother's name. A sob escaped her, small and tight. Miller put a gentle hand on her arm. He said, "We're doing everything we can." The words were meant to comfort, but what comfort could there be? Standing before this tomb? The air in the cave was cold, heavy with the smell of damp earth, and something else, something metallic and faintly unsettling. How long had those names been there? Who had scratched them? And with what? Her fingers traced the faint lines of her brother's name. It felt like touching a wound. Detective Miller explained the situation. The vault was old, custom-fitted, it seemed. No blueprints, no records of its installation. They were trying to figure out how to open it. It was welded shut, not just locked, but sealed with thick, unforgiving beads of metal along every seam. Welded from the outside. That detail snagged in Sarah's mind. Welded. Why? The original camp director, Mr. Henderson, was still alive. Barely. He was in his late 80s, residing in a nursing home in a nearby town. Miller had already paid him a visit. "How did that go?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet. Miller hesitated. "He's frail. His memory is patchy. Or so he claims." When Miller had mentioned Camp Holloway, the vault, the names, Henderson had become agitated. He'd insisted, his voice a reedy rasp, that the teens had run away. "Bad blood," he'd apparently muttered. "Always knew they were trouble." He denied any knowledge of a vault. A storage locker maybe for old equipment long forgotten. He'd dismissed the names as a prank, a cruel hoax. But his eyes, Miller said, his eyes had been sharp. Too sharp for a man lost in senility. There was a flicker of something in them. Fear? Or just the cunning of an old man cornered? Sarah felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Henderson. He'd been the face of their family's pain for so long, the man whose easy dismissal had condemned them to decades of uncertainty. He was the one who said Marcus and Lena were irresponsible, ungrateful. He had shaped the narrative. Could he have shaped this monstrous reality too? The challenge of the vault was immense. Experts were consulted. Demolition crews, safecrackers, engineers. Each one who examined it shook their head. This wasn't a standard safe. This was something else. Fortified. Crude but effective. It would take time, specialized equipment, and money. The county was small, its resources limited. Days turned into a week. Sarah stayed, renting a room in a small motel, the silence of it amplifying the turmoil inside her. She visited the camp every day, standing by the police tape, a silent sentinel. She needed to be there. For Marcus, for Lena, for her parents, who had died with this question burning in their hearts. The local community, initially just curious, began to rally. Old-timers remembered the disappearances, the fear that had gripped the town that summer. Younger people, hearing the story for the first time, were outraged. Donations started to come in for the Holloway Vault Fund. A local welding company offered its services, its equipment. The weight of 35 years of silence was pressing in, demanding to be broken. But the steel held firm, a silent, defiant guardian of whatever lay within. What if it was nothing? Sarah tortured herself with that thought. What if Henderson was right, and it was just an old storage space? The name's a cruel coincidence. The doubt was a sliver of ice in her heart. But then she'd remember the other words. We didn't run. That wasn't a prank. That was a plea. A closer examination of the vault door yielded more faint details. Forensics teams, patient and meticulous, dusted and photographed every inch. Beneath the larger, clearer message, "We didn't run," were other, fainter scratches, almost invisible under the layers of grime and rust. It took high-intensity lights and magnification to decipher them. One phrase, tiny and jagged, made Sarah's breath catch. "He locked us in." Chills traced down her spine. He? Who was he? It had to be Henderson. It had to be. The words were like a scream trapped in metal. What kind of person would do this? The investigators documented it all. The cold precision of their work, a stark contrast to the boiling emotions the discovery evoked. They tried to determine what tool was used for the scratches. Something small, metallic, sharp. A nail? A piece of broken glass? Or, a chilling thought, perhaps an item from the scavenger hunt itself. A compass needle? A belt buckle? The image of Marcus or Lena, trapped in darkness, desperately etching their truth onto that unyielding steel, was unbearable. Yet, Sarah couldn't look away. This was their voice, finally, after all these years. Detective Miller, meanwhile, was digging. He pulled the original police files from 1982. They were thin, mostly witness statements from Henderson and a few camp counselors. The prevailing theory: the teens ran away. Case closed, unofficially. But Miller was looking for discrepancies, for anything that didn't fit Henderson's smooth narrative. He found an old, itemized receipt tucked into the back of the folder, almost overlooked. An order placed by Henderson for Camp Holloway, dated May 1982, just weeks before the summer session began. A large quantity of quick-drying cement, several heavy-duty steel plates, welding rods, and equipment rental. The stated purpose on the invoice: urgent structural repairs to camp retaining wall and cellar. But there were no official work orders, no permits pulled for such major repairs. And no one Miller spoke to, no former campers or staff he could track down, remembered any significant construction work that summer, certainly not involving a cellar or a large retaining wall project. The cave wasn't a cellar, it was just a cave, unless someone had made it into something more. The pieces began to connect, forming a horrifying picture: the steel plates, the welding equipment, the cement, not for repairs, for construction, or for sealing something away. Sarah, driven by a desperate need to understand, started her own search for anyone connected to that last summer at Camp Holloway. Most leads went nowhere. People had moved, changed names, passed away. But then, a breakthrough. An email from a woman named Clara, who had been a junior counselor at Holloway in 1982. She lived several states away now, but the news about the vault had reached her, stirring up memories she'd tried to suppress for decades. She agreed to talk to Sarah over a video call. Clara's face was lined, her eyes holding a deep sadness. She remembered Marcus and Lena well. She said they were good kids. Marcus a bit of a joker, Lena quieter, artistic. Not troublemakers. Not runaways. She'd never believed it. What did she remember about Henderson? Sarah asked. Clara's expression darkened. He was strict, she said. Very controlling. He had a temper he usually kept hidden, but sometimes it flared. And he was strange about the woods behind the main cabins, especially the area around the cave. He'd forbidden anyone from going near it. Said it was unstable, dangerous, which was odd, because it had always been a known, if unexciting, landmark. The night of the scavenger hunt, Clara recalled, was chaotic. A storm had blown in suddenly, with fierce winds and torrential rain. The hunt was called off, counselors scrambling to get the kids back to their cabins. Marcus and Lena were on the same team. They were last seen heading towards the woods, following a clue that supposedly led to a hidden treasure near the old oak tree, which stood not far from the cave. When they didn't return, the initial assumption was they'd gotten lost or were sheltering from the storm. Henderson, however, seemed strangely unconcerned, almost calm. He organized a cursory search, but mostly, Clara said, he seemed intent on managing the narrative. By morning, when there was still no sign of them, he was already telling everyone they'd run off. He'd found a note, he claimed, in their cabin. A poorly written confession of their plan to escape. No one ever saw that note. He said he'd given it to the police, but it wasn't in any file. Clara had always doubted it. Now, hearing about the vault, a terrible suspicion she'd harbored for years solidified into a sickening certainty. Did she know anything about a vault being built? Or materials being brought in? Clara shook her head. Henderson handled all the camp's maintenance and supplies himself, or with a groundskeeper who was fiercely loyal and equally taciturn. If something like that was happening, it was kept very quiet. But the cave being off limits, his strange demeanor, it all felt connected now, didn't it? A dark, ugly knot tightening around that summer. The day came for the first serious attempt to open the vault. A specialized heavy works crew arrived, their truck loaded with cutting torches, hydraulic spreaders, and diamond-tipped saws. The air around the cave crackled with anticipation, and a heavy sense of dread. A small crowd had gathered. Local residents, a few reporters with cameras, Sarah, and Detective Miller. The mood was somber, almost reverent. This wasn't just about opening a door. It was about uncovering a truth that had been entombed for over 3 decades. The crew chief, a burly man with grim eyes, surveyed the vault door. He said, "This won't be easy. That steel is thick, and those welds are deep." They started with the torches, the hiss and roar echoing eerily in the confined space of the cave. Sparks flew, a shower of orange against the gloom. The smell of burning metal filled the air, acrid and sharp. Hours passed. The crew worked in shifts, the noise relentless. Sarah sat on a folding chair Miller had provided, clutching a cold bottle of water, her gaze fixed on the glowing point of the torch against the steel. Each minute stretched into an eternity. Progress was agonizingly slow. The welds were proving even tougher than anticipated, almost as if they were made of something more than just steel, something infused with a desperate will to remain sealed. Then, a setback, a major one. The primary cutting torch overheated and failed. A specialized drill bit, attempting to pierce the plate itself, snapped with a jarring crack. The hydraulic spreader, designed to pry open reinforced doors, strained against the vault's edge but couldn't find purchase, the metal groaning in protest but refusing to yield. The crew chief finally called a halt, wiping sweat and grime from his face. He told Miller, "This is beyond what we have here. The steel is incredibly hard, almost like it's been case-hardened, and the way it's set into the rock, it's like it became part of the mountain. We need heavier gear, maybe even controlled blasting. But that's risky with the cave stability." A wave of despair washed over Sarah. So close. Yet the door remained, unbreached, impenetrable. It felt like a physical blow. Hope, which had flickered so brightly, now dimmed, threatening to extinguish. The crowd murmured, a collective sigh of frustration and disappointment. Some of the reporters started packing up. The story was losing its immediate momentum. Was this it? Would the vault keep its secrets forever? Mr. Henderson, through a newly hired, expensive-looking lawyer, seized the opportunity. He issued a public statement. It was cold, dismissive. He expressed sympathy for the lingering pain of the families, but stated unequivocally that the vault was an old, forgotten camp storage unit, possibly dating back to before his tenure as director. The names, he suggested, were a cruel and recent defacement, an attempt by unknown parties to sensationalize a tragic but closed chapter. He decried the media circus and the unfounded speculation that was tarnishing his reputation in his final years. He was an old man, he said, who had dedicated his life to youth development. This was a witch hunt. The statement was a calculated move, designed to sow doubt, to paint himself as the victim. And for some, it worked. The narrative began to shift, just slightly. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was all a terrible misunderstanding, a modern hoax layered onto an old tragedy. Sarah felt a surge of rage, cold and fierce. That smooth, practiced denial. It was the same tone her parents had faced 35 years ago. Henderson was still trying to control the story, even now. But the words, "He locked us in," burned in her memory. That wasn't a hoax. That was a testament. She looked at the vault, defeated for now but not forever. She told Miller, "We have to open it. Whatever it takes." He nodded, his jaw set. "We will," he promised. "We will." The failed attempt was not an ending, she realized. It was just another obstacle, and it made her more determined than ever. Detective Miller, undeterred by Henderson's statement, redoubled his efforts. He started digging into Henderson's financial history from the early 1980s. It was a painstaking process, sifting through old bank records, property deeds, business licenses. What he found was telling. Henderson wasn't just a humble camp director. He'd had several side businesses, small ventures that mostly failed. But there were irregularities. Large cash deposits with no clear source. Property transactions that seemed designed to obscure ownership. Whispers of connections to less than savory local figures involved in smuggling or fencing stolen goods. Nothing concrete enough for charges back then, but a pattern of someone operating in the gray areas of the law. Was Camp Holloway, or specifically that hidden cave, part of these activities? A place to store illicit goods? A secret meeting spot? If Marcus and Lena had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see during that scavenger hunt, it provided a chillingly plausible motive. A motive for silencing them permanently. The forensic team, meanwhile, hadn't given up on the vault door itself. They brought in a metallurgist. His findings were crucial. The steel of the door was unusually thick, yes, but it was the welds that were peculiar. They were expertly done, deep and strong, but also showed signs of being applied in haste, with an almost frantic energy, and the cement. Samples taken from around the edges where the vault met the rock face were analyzed. It matched the type of quick-drying cement Henderson had ordered in May 1982. There was more. Microscopic tool marks on the heads of bolts that seemed to anchor the frame of the vault into the rock suggested they were tightened with immense force, some even stripped, as if someone was desperate to make it secure. And the scratches. Marcus plus Lena. We didn't run. He locked us in. The metallurgist confirmed they were old, the metal within the grooves showing oxidation consistent with decades of exposure, even within the relative shelter of the cave. He believed the tool used was indeed something small and hard, wielded with considerable pressure. Every new piece of evidence tightened the net, not around a prankster, but around a past crime, meticulously concealed. The image of Henderson, the avuncular camp director, began to crumble, replaced by something far more sinister. The decision was made to bring in a specialized industrial cutting firm from a larger city. They had the equipment, the expertise, for jobs like this: bank vaults, decommissioned military bunkers. It was expensive, but the Holloway Vault Fund, swelled by donations from an increasingly invested public, covered the cost. The day of the second attempt dawned clear and cool. There was a different atmosphere this time. Less hopeful excitement, more grim determination. Sarah was there again, a silent fixture. She held the small, faded photograph of Marcus and Lena, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the grim reality of the cave. The new crew was efficient, all business. They set up their plasma cutter, a far more powerful tool than the previous torches. The sound it made was different, a high-pitched, intense scream as it bit into the steel. Water jets played on the metal to keep it cool, hissing steam filling the air. This time, there was visible progress. A glowing orange line slowly, steadily grew across the face of the vault. It took hours. The sun climbed high, then began to dip towards the horizon. The crew worked tirelessly, their faces masked, intent. Finally, with a groan of tortured metal, a large rectangular section of the door was cut free. A thick, acrid smell billowed out from the opening, a smell of stagnant air, decay, and something else, something indescribably awful. It made several people gag, step back. Even the hardened crew members paused, exchanging uneasy glances. A hush fell over the onlookers. What was inside? For a moment, no one moved. Then, one of the technicians, equipped with a respirator and a powerful flashlight attached to a flexible scope, carefully approached the opening. He maneuvered the camera lens through the jagged hole. Everyone watched his face, hidden behind the mask, but his body language spoke volumes. He went still. Then he recoiled, just slightly. A sudden, jerky movement. He pulled the scope out, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. He looked at Detective Miller, and though no words were spoken, the message was clear. They had found them, or what remained of them. The air in the cave, already heavy, seemed to solidify, pressing down with the weight of an awful, undeniable truth. There was no turning back now. The last barrier was breached. The crew worked for another hour, cutting away more of the door until the opening was large enough for a person to enter. Detective Miller was the first to look inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. Sarah stood a few feet behind him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She could smell it now, that terrible, unforgettable odor. The odor of death, undisturbed for decades. Miller didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, his voice low and strained, he said, "Oh God." He stepped back, gesturing for the forensic team to proceed. Sarah couldn't wait. She pushed forward, needing to see, needing to know, no matter how horrific. She peered into the black maw of the vault. It wasn't large inside. A small, roughly hewn chamber, perhaps 10 feet square, and there, on the cold stone floor, were the remains. 2 skeletons, small, curled in on themselves, as if trying to find comfort in their final moments. Time had reduced them to bone, but there was no mistaking who they were. Near one, a glint of metal, a simple chain with a small, tarnished silver charm, a crescent moon, Lena's bracelet. Sarah remembered her mother describing it, bought at a local craft fair. Near the other, a Boy Scout-style whistle on a rotted lanyard. Marcus's whistle. He'd been so proud of it, part of his official scavenger hunt gear. A collective gasp, a muffled sob from someone in the small crowd gathered at the cave mouth. This was it, the end of a 35-year search, the confirmation of the worst fears. But the horror wasn't over. As the forensic team, clad in white suits, began their grim work, documenting every detail, they found more. More scratches. Not on the outside of the door this time, but on the inside. Faint, desperate marks, etched into the cold steel with what must have been failing strength. A series of vertical lines, groups of 7, then another group. Days. They had been alive in here. For how long? Weeks? The thought was unimaginable. And then, a few words, barely legible, heartbreaking in their simplicity. "Sorry, Mama." And, lower down, almost at floor level, as if scrawled by someone lying down, the single word, "cold." Sarah sank to her knees, a raw cry torn from her throat. The photograph of Marcus and Lena slipped from her numb fingers, falling face down onto the damp cave floor. Her brother, Lena. Trapped in this suffocating darkness, hungry, thirsty, cold, scratching their last goodbyes onto a steel door that would become their coffin. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was monstrous. The camp, or what was left of it, became a major crime scene. The discovery of the remains of Marcus Washington and Lena Holloway inside the sealed vault sent shockwaves far beyond the small county. This was no longer a cold case based on speculation. This was a homicide investigation. 2 homicides. The focus, naturally, fell squarely on Mr. Alistair Henderson. The evidence was damning. His purchase of the materials used to construct and seal the vault just before the teens disappeared, his immediate and unwavering insistence they had run away, his suspicious off-limits policy regarding the cave, the testimonies of former staff about his behavior, and now the undeniable physical proof of their horrific end within a structure he likely built. Detective Miller moved quickly. An arrest warrant was issued for Henderson on 2 counts of murder, but when officers arrived at the nursing home, they found him unresponsive in his bed. He'd suffered a massive stroke overnight. He was alive, but doctors said he was unlikely to regain consciousness, let alone the ability to speak or comprehend legal proceedings. Justice, it seemed, was to be cheated by biology. Sarah felt a complex storm of emotions. Relief that Marcus and Lena were found, that their story was no longer buried. Immense soul-crushing grief at the confirmation of their suffering. And now, a bitter, frustrating anger that Henderson might escape facing what he did. She wanted to look him in the eye, to see him acknowledge the lives he'd stolen, the pain he'd caused. That confrontation would never happen. What was his motive? The investigation continued to piece it together. The leading theory remained that Marcus and Lena, during the scavenger hunt, had stumbled upon Henderson using the cave for illegal activities, perhaps storing stolen goods, as Miller's financial probing suggested. Maybe they saw something, heard something. Henderson, fearing exposure that would ruin his carefully crafted image and lead to prison, had panicked. He'd lured them, or forced them into the pre-existing vault, or a chamber he was already fortifying, and sealed them in. The welding, the cement, all pointed to a desperate, perhaps even frenzied effort to make their tomb impenetrable. It wasn't a clean, quick crime of passion. It was a drawn-out act of cruelty, leaving them to a slow, terrifying death. The notes scratched inside the vault were a testament to their desperate hope, then their fading despair. There would be no trial, no public reckoning for Henderson. He lingered for a few weeks in that vegetative state, a blank shell, and then he died. Some called it ironic, others, a final injustice. For Sarah, it was just empty. The villain of her family's story was gone, but he'd taken the full truth of his reasons, the specific details of that night, with him to the grave. Had he acted alone? The loyal, taciturn groundskeeper Clara had mentioned had died years ago. There were no other obvious accomplices. It seemed Henderson was capable of this monstrous act all by himself, driven by a desperate need to protect his secrets, his reputation, whatever dark enterprises he was involved in. The chilling message on the outside of the vault, "He locked us in," was likely scratched by one of the teens with their last remaining strength, perhaps through a tiny gap before the final welds, or by someone who knew and was too scared to speak but needed to leave a sign. That detail remained a haunting ambiguity. Was there another witness who stayed silent for all those years? Or was it purely the children's own desperate communication, the lack of a full confession, of a clear sequence of events from the perpetrator, left a void? The bodies of Marcus Washington and Lena Holloway were finally laid to rest, 35 years late. A joint funeral was held in their old neighborhood, the church overflowing with people who remembered them, and many more who only knew their tragic story. Sarah spoke, her voice thick with emotion but steady. She spoke of Marcus's laugh, Lena's kindness, their bright futures stolen away. She spoke of the parents who had waited, hoped, and grieved without answers for so long. There was a sense of profound sadness, but also a quiet dignity in finally being able to say goodbye. The camp itself was condemned, the land eventually taken over by the state. The cave entrance was sealed, this time by engineers, permanently, not with a steel door, but with concrete and earth, a final, definitive closure. A simple bronze plaque was placed nearby, bearing their names and the years of their short lives. Marcus Washington, 1967, 1982. Lena Holloway, 1968, 1982. Lost, but not forgotten. Sarah returned home, carrying the weight of the truth. It was a heavy burden, but lighter in some ways than the decades of not knowing. The resolution was bittersweet, deeply imperfect. The full why from Henderson would remain unspoken, a dark shadow. The legal justice was incomplete, but Marcus and Lena were home. Their story was told. The vault's silence had been broken, its terrible secret brought into the light. The echoes of their last desperate scratches on cold steel would fade, but the memory of two bright lives, and the chilling darkness that consumed them in that lonely cave, would linger. A reminder of how secrets, buried deep, can fester, and how truth, no matter how long it takes, often finds a way to surface, demanding to be heard. The camp was gone, Henderson was gone, but the questions about how such a thing could happen, how one man could inflict such unimaginable cruelty, remained, hanging in the quiet air where Camp Holloway once stood. Have you ever heard of anything like this? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments.